Shabbat Shalom. I just returned from Israel just over a week ago, and as I've said to some of you, it was harder than ever to leave. And as some of you know, and now everyone will know, I long have been in love with the Hebrew language and deeply in love with Hebrew poetry, both the written word and song, and that is even more true in these months after October 7th. And I will say that in years of studying Hebrew poetry, I've never encountered anything like the words that Dr. Rachel Korazim shared with us during my 10 days of study at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Her course this year was entitled Poetry in the Wake of October 7th. And these poems are stunning in every sense of the word. And I wish I could share every single one. But you actually have two on your handout. We're going to look at one together, but you have an extra one to take home and sit with over Shabbat. And the one that touched me the most, the one that I've really been holding these weeks, and that feels right for this particular Shabbat. This particular Shabbat, even though we're in this beautiful space with this beautiful community, it's actually the first of the Shabbat known as the 3 weeks or the 3 Shabbatot of affliction that lead us into Tisha B'Av in just a couple of weeks. And this poem is called Now We Need a New Torah. And first I'm going to read it in Hebrew because Dr. Korazim says we have to hear the Hebrew. And so it's by a man named Elchanan Nir, who is a writer and a lecturer and a rabbi in, I believe, in Efrat, just over the Green Line. And he writes, Achshav kamo avir l'neshima, anachnu tzrichim Torah chadasha. Achshav b'tok ha'avir shenigmar, v'hatzavar shenimchak. אנחנו צריכים משנה חדשה וגמרא חדשה וקבלה חדשה ועליות נשמה חדשה ובתוך כל השבר והמלח והחרבה עכשיו חסידות חדשה וציונות חדשה והרב קוק חדש וברנר חדש ולאה גולדברג חדשה ויחווה דעת חדש ואומנות חדשה ושירה חדשה וספרות חדשה וקולנוע חדש ומילים חדשים עתיקים, ונשמות חדשות עתיקות מהאוצר, ואחווה חדשה מתוך הבכייה הנוראה. כי נשטפנו כולנו בנהרות רעים ובארי, ואין בנו הר ואין עוד לוחות, ואין לנו משה ואין בנו כוחות, ובידינו עכשיו הכל ניתן. So I'm going to invite you, you should have it with you, and if you don't, maybe someone sitting near you does. I'm going to invite you to turn to someone sitting next to you, even better if it's someone you don't already know. And if you're watching from home, I think we're going to put it up on the screen. It's already up there, and you can read it, and you can put comments and questions in the chat, and you can be chavruta at home while we're doing a little bit of learning together here. And so I'm going to invite you to sit together with that English, and maybe you just want to sit with the words and the pain and the questions and talk to each other about some of that. Or I'm going to invite you to consider for yourself in these 9 months, what new Torah have you had to write? And remember that Torah can mean scrolls of Torah. It can mean our way of being in the world. And I also want to say that Torah means instruction. So what new Torah do you feel like you've either had to write or had to learn so far this year? And so I'm going to invite us, we're going to take just a couple of minutes of some Chavruta style learning, and then we will just come back together. So take 3 or 4 minutes with the people sitting around you, introduce yourself if you don't already know each other, and do some learning together. There was a question of when it was written. I believe it was published on December 12th, 2023. 23, so it was written just after, probably written just after October 7th and published soon after. Thank you. And for those who are familiar with sort of some of Israel's cultural buzzwords, it was published by someone much further to the right religiously and politically, but published in Haaretz, which is sort of tends to be a paper a little bit more on the left. So it's sort of an interesting conversation happening even just in that decision and the way it was published. So if you want a little extra credit when you go home, you can read the second poem, which is by he made Aliyah. He was an immigrant a long time ago from the Soviet Union, from Russia, by Michael Zatz, who's a lawyer, also not a poet. And you can read them in conversation because he also writes of similar themes of sort of not knowing what language to use for the space in which he finds himself. Now, if you read Rabbi Yoshi's Daily Kavanah this morning, which I know everyone did, you read about the way that Moses in this week's parasha has to begin to imagine a new Torah, one in which he is not a leader, and one that makes way, I think, for Elchanan Nir's words, new ancient words. And this week's parasha also introduces us to the daughters of Slaf Echad, who were these trailblazers who literally write new Torah as they demand laws and stories that reflect their experience. So this poem has sat with me because it is devastating. It is a poem of despair and of loss and of grief. And this most recent trip back reminded me that is the Israeli experience still, these 9 months later after October 7th. And calendrically and liturgically, it's actually the experience of this time of year on the Jewish calendar. You can tell by the terrible weather and, affliction here in this beautiful space. But here's the thing for Shabbat. Jewish tradition, both ancient and modern, never leaves us in despair. We never finish a study of text or recitation of Torah without what we call a nechemta, an image of comfort. And so Nir's last words in this poem, I'm not sure if he meant them to, but they give me that hope. He says, Uviyadenu achshav hakol nitan. From this moment, everything is in our hands. And so maybe the nechemta, the hope we offer on this Shabbat, coming out of this poem in these 3 weeks, that we can and we will write these new Torahs, the ones that share stories and shape visions that reflect our experiences. Like our ancestors, we will simply continue to write new Torahs of grief and of joy, of loss and of possibility, of devastation and also of hope. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.